Hello, and welcome to this week's Movie Math, where Hollywood continues to ask itself the question of the moment. What are movie theaters for these days? In a world of streaming, video games, and concerts galore, why would anyone go to the multiplex? Well, I have my theory as to how the business is evolving, and of course, as always, I'm interested in hearing your own thoughts and theories down below. All right, so I think there are two things that are emerging for the sweet spot for movie theaters. Number one is movie theater subscriptions. For a low flat fee per month, especially if you really utilize the membership, why stay home and watch something when you could go out to the movies at no extra cost, basically? I'm at least seeing this in big cities. I'm very curious to see if you've noticed this as well. And if you haven't, maybe now keep an eye out for it. But I would say for the last month or so, I'm starting to see a lot more people at the movies alone, which is interesting to me because I would say even in the last year, I've seen some of you be like, is it okay to go to the movies alone? And others of us, I always go alone as a critic, but a lot of people have been like, it's awesome to go alone. And it seems that stigma has been blown away. I see more and more people, and not just men, but I'm seeing women as well, at the theater alone, on their phones before the film starts. And that's just really fascinating to me. The movie theater subscriber is someone who will see anything that Hollywood puts out, particularly on a premium screen, because at least with AMC subscription, there's no extra cost for that either. Case in point, look at the Dolby pre-sales for The Roses. The Roses! Ain't nobody want to see that unless it's for free. And it essentially is if you're a movie theater subscriber. All right, then the second thing is big events. Of course, there was Avatar back in the day and then also recently. But we saw it with Minions 2, Barbenheimer, then Minecraft, Sinners. It's got to have a social media component we're seeing. And now K-pop Demon Hunters this weekend, and even Weapons to a degree. At least for its opening weekend, it couldn't sustain it, but for its opening weekend, it was a mini event. I'm talking movies that you want to see with the crowd, where you hope that the audience around you interacts with the film, whereas other times you're like, don't you dare! Shh, zip it! But here you're like, oh, I hope someone does something zany and crazy. And they most often do for these big movies. Comic book movies used to be this, culminating in one of the most historic event weekends Hollywood has ever had, Avengers Endgame. That was so cool. Every theater in New York City, and I think almost the world, was sold out for that weekend. And well in advance, too. It was so cool. I've told you my story about that senior couple who walked up day of and was like, 2 for Avengers Endgame, please. And they were like, have you seen the news? And they were like, all right, well, where else can we go? And they were like, nowhere. There's nowhere for you to see this movie this weekend, which was hilarious. Star Wars too, obviously really strong franchises have this relationship with audiences, even casuals, that you simply don't miss the latest installment until Disney managed to ruin both of those. But Jurassic World is still managing to hold on. It's a little weaker, but it's still holding on. But basically what I'm saying is you're not just going to see a movie in these circumstances, but you're going to a party. It's almost like a mini concert. It's tapping into that kind of a feeling. So the former, the movie theater subscriber, is what's maintaining a pulse for the business, and the latter is what's now creating breakout hits. Again, what are your theories? Yes, movie business deep thoughts. Be sure to subscribe so we can continue to ponder the movie business together as it evolves before our very eyes through trial and error. What a hoot to watch. So wildly entertaining. In some cases, more entertaining than the movies and TV shows themselves. K-pop Demon Hunters, though, is truly in the new Frozen and Encanto, only it's not from Disney. Whew, Disney's having a rough year. Although Lilo and Stitch, of course, is a huge hit. But this film is actually from Sony Animation, who makes the Spider-Verse films, which they held on to and released in theaters. But they had so little faith in this, or didn't understand it, that they sold it to Netflix. Although I think Netflix is a crucial partner in how this phenomenon has been built. Now, Netflix didn't even know what they had. Totally caught by surprise as this K-pop animated movie is racing to become the most watched movie of all time on the streamer. That will happen next week because consistently, for several weeks now, K-pop Demon Hunters has gotten about 25 million views per week. Has not dropped, has not wavered, which means it's surely pulling in some new viewers, but the rewatchability factor on this is insane. Oh, ka-ching! But we were wondering these past few weeks, would it have done well in theaters? To be honest, I think that it would have performed like Encanto. I think it would have been a slow build as people discovered it, and then something that exploded on streaming where you could watch it on a loop. Because again, we've seen that. Frozen was a sensation in theaters. Interesting. Could it have been a Frozen? We'll never know for sure. But Encanto and Moana really benefited from being on streaming services. But what's interesting, though, is that Netflix is kind of doing it backwards. They did release K-pop Demon Hunters in theaters up front, just for a qualifying run for awards season, but it really didn't have a presence there. But now, after they've cultivated a super fandom online, totally by accident, they send it to theaters this weekend in a major way, where fans of all ages, but mostly tween girls, have flooded theaters for just 2 days only. There weren't even showtimes on Friday. And as number one, to watch the movie yet again on the big screen. And we've seen some wonderful things, speaking of social media, online. Them just screaming at the top of their lungs like they're at a Taylor Swift concert. And it does remind me a little bit of when that hit theaters. It seems to be the tween girl equivalent of Minecraft, or a tween version of Barbie, which is interesting because I think K-pop Demon Hunters feels like Barbie, the animated shows and movies, which are typically, by the way, also on streaming, meets the Disney princesses. Are you a K-pop Demon Hunters fan yet, or does the pop culture phenomenon continue to escape you? Yes, we're still talking about K-pop Demon Hunters because there is a lot to unpack here. This isn't just a phenomenon for the movie itself. You're seeing the movie business and potentially Netflix's formula change before your eyes. Will big money, as it often does, change people's long-held patterns? I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this. Again, sound off down below. So, Netflix doesn't officially report box office numbers because they are not in the movie theater business, thank you. They have intense loyalty to their subscribers because they want to keep them. They are, after all, the Coca-Cola of streaming. And they have long said that, despite their, ambition to win Oscars and have respect within the industry, their number one goal is to be the number one streaming service, which they are, and to, they do that by making their customers, their subscribers, number one. But now they're number one at the box office because while they haven't reported these numbers, they're still reported by the industry. The studios will always report their own numbers, which are cross-checked with, other studios' estimates and the information from the exhibitors, the theater owners themselves, and that's how the box office is made. So Netflix doesn't have to report the numbers for them to still show up. Now, and Netflix can still hold its position of like, we're not really in the movie theater business, but maybe they should be. Now that they've done it for the first time, capture the number one spot, should they try and do it again? They have some big movies coming out later this year, which I think would do very well in theaters. I'm talking Frankenstein. As soon as that trailer hit, everybody was like, I want to see this on a big screen. Knives Out 3, perhaps. The second Knives Out, the first for Netflix, was released theatrically, but in a very small, limited window. K-pop Demon Hunters has a very wide release. Of course, it's only for 2 days, but they really jam-packed as many screenings as they could in those 2 days, and most of them sold out, which is incredible. And Frankenstein will be in select theaters for 3 weeks before it hits Netflix. That's not small. Same for Oscar frontrunner Jay Kelly. And then while it hasn't been set yet officially, you'll probably see the same 3-week window for Knives Out 3. And of course, Greta Gerwig has her 2-week IMAX exclusive coming up for her Narnia in 2026. Well, AMC ended its boycott of Netflix movies. Yes, if you wanted to see K-pop Demon Hunters, the sing-along this weekend, you wouldn't be able to do it at an AMC because they held firm at their boycott because they think Netflix undermines their business. But Regal kept adding more and more showtimes this whole weekend. They were like, you don't want everybody's money? We'll take it. But AMC just would not. I think maybe it was too late for them to cave, but I'm sure they were like, uh-oh. So if Netflix, for its biggest movies, continues to do this. And, they have these 3 weeks for these upcoming films. That's basically, I counted it out, a 22-day theatrical window. That's longer than Universal's 17-day window for flops. Underperformers. So how on earth could any movie theater have a problem with that? I bet you AMC caves, especially after this weekend, because they lost out on a lot of money. Not just in ticket sales, which they only get a percentage of, but they would have kept all those sweet, sweet concession stand sales for themselves. Also, since this was a last-minute endeavor, nobody, even the theaters that showed K-pop Demon Hunters, had merch. Everybody's been sleeping on merch on this. Even Netflix, they've had to sell the stuffed tiger that was supposed to be a crew gift for wrapping. They were like, make more of them and sell them, because there's such a demand for product and for the fans wanting to celebrate this film. I love K-pop Demon Hunters. I didn't go see it this weekend, but I would have picked up merch if they'd had it at the theater. It's crazy they didn't have anything. Where were the popcorn buckets? It really was a last minute thing. But what? So on that note, why did Netflix do this? It can't be about money, because Netflix just has money pouring in because of their subscribers. They make so much money at Netflix that that's the whole reason all the other studios got into the streaming business. So they don't need the money. I think the number one bragging rights are pretty sweet, although I'm sure not in their wildest dreams Netflix thought they would do that. I believe that they did this originally because it's part of their Oscar push, with strong hopes that K-pop Demon Hunters will not only get nominated for Best Animated Feature and Best Original Song, but might even win one or both categories. This limited release makes K-pop Demon Hunters feel less like a streaming movie and more like a theatrical release. Again, it did have a qualifying run, but you can't fool the industry. They know that was just a qualifying run, a loophole that Netflix was using. They weren't really putting the film in theaters. So I think that's frowned upon. For instance, Netflix has had a number of films nominated in live action and animation, but their winner, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, that was in select theaters for an entire month before it hit streaming. Because remember, the Oscars don't just celebrate great films, but films that help the movie business. And for most awards voters, that still means helping theatrical. And this weekend, Netflix can now say they really helped movie theaters, except AMC. Now, how quickly can Netflix and Sony Animation make another K-pop Demon Hunters movie? It was 6 years between Frozen movies, although there were 2 shorts in between that time to keep the IP alive. And there were 5 years between the 2 Spider-Verse movies, and the second film did exponentially better as its audience had grown during that time. However, Netflix doesn't have the scope of Disney or Marvel's Spider-Man. Remember, the video games are helping Miles Morales a lot as well, to keep fans engaged with an IP. Although they are building, for instance, Netflix House, they're trying to make inroads there, but they don't have the theme parks, they don't have the merch, they don't have the comics, they don't have the video games that the other studios have. So we'll see if they can keep K-pop Demon Hunters. Right now, I think they're just focused on an Oscar, but obviously, they want K-pop Demon Hunters 2 to be a massive hit as well. And of course, one has to wonder what their theatrical play might be for that film. Although, speaking of taking a long time, to be fair, Wednesday, Squid Game, and Stranger Things have all taken their sweet time between seasons. And while there was a lot of complaining, it didn't affect any of their viewership whatsoever. Maybe Wednesday is scooch, although part 2 hasn't dropped just yet. But K-pop Demon Hunters is without a doubt a cultural phenomenon, something the movie business desperately needs right now, because other franchises and genres, well, they're not delivering. Summer 2025 didn't turn out quite the way Hollywood hoped it would, box office-wise. And while there are a couple of places we can assign some blame, the biggest culprit is comic book movies. 3 comic book films hit the marketplace this summer, all underperforming, and not a single comic book film this year was able to surpass 700 million worldwide, something that hasn't happened since 2011, with the exception of 2020 for the pandemic. What was going on in 2011, right? It seems like, how could that be? Well, that was right before the Avengers movie hit and Nolan's final Batman film, both in 2012. Back then, there were little breaks in these franchises. Marvel, was still being built. This was the first Thor and Cat movie that year. Neither one did particularly well, although both characters would become very popular within the franchise. And Fox's experiment of the X-Men without Hugh Jackman, well, that didn't go so well. But they course corrected beautifully with X-Men Days of Future Past shortly after. But it's not like Hollywood wasn't making any money that year. They, in fact, still had $3 billion pictures. 3 of them. That's more than last year. I think so, yeah. The final Harry Potter, Transformers 3, and Pirates of the Caribbean 4 before Johnny Depp's career imploded. Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise has been making those for a long time. And also Twilight did nice box office as well. So, if comic book movies have to, at the very least, take a bit of a break, the movie business isn't going to go away, right? But it sure will lose a significant crutch. And make no mistake, that's what it's been. That's what the comic book genre has been for Hollywood, a crutch. It's rallied so heavily on it, relied so heavily on comic book movies for the past decade, which is part of why they've just been destroyed, because Hollywood milked that genre dry. I also feel there's not enough action in these recent films, even despite not a drop in the budgets. It's weird. Some of you disagree with me, but I think if you compare, I just think the action sequences aren't what they should be. I think Deadpool and Wolverine had a lot of great action sequences. And I would say also set pieces, right? I think action things, set pieces, these movies were all very short on that. And that's crucial to these films doing well. Remember what I told you about that Steven Soderbergh story about seeing that dude at the airport fast forwarding from set piece to set piece to set piece. What, you just fast forward the whole movie these days because there's very little of that. But my theory will be put to the test with Avengers Doomsday, with the return of the Russo brothers who pioneered this or perfected it. And, I'm sure they're going to bring it back. And so, we'll see how a movie with that quality once again does. Also, they bring in the sexy blowouts. The Russo brothers love beefcake. They haven't been so big on cheesecake, but we'll see if that changes. The Russo brothers, even though they can't make a movie to save their lives outside of Marvel, they really, really knew what they were doing with the Marvel formula. At least Superman can still say, look up, because he's flown the highest of all the comic book movies this year, crossing $600 million now. Fantastic Four, he's not going to catch Man of Steel or the Batman still. And as I've been saying, that's not great. And Fantastic Four will likely get to $500 million, but I don't think much higher. And both films are surely a disappointment for their studios, although you'll never hear Zazie or Iger admit it. And I don't think they should. They want to present a strong front, but behind the scenes, they know, and hopefully they're doing something about it. All right, so what's going on with weapons? Some of you were pretty frustrated about my comments re weapons last week, so let's go into it a little bit more, and I haven't changed my position, but I can back it up. So Weapons is without a doubt an extremely successful movie. It has sailed past its break-even point and will likely end up right alongside Final Destination Bloodlines. These movies both have low budgets, both performed about the same at the box office, and are both huge hits for Warner Brothers in the horror department. But I think, a lot of you are saying that Weapons is like this huge cultural phenomenon, but then would you say the same about Final Destination Bloodlines? The point I'm trying to make is that it ended up being more of a Final Destination Bloodlines than it did a Sinners or a Get Out. And that's what it looked like it might become its opening weekend. It seemed like it was poised to have that kind of an effect, but it just didn't materialize. Now, some of you have said, well, that's not fair because Sinners and Get Out had the Black community giving them a boost. But I would counter that with saying that Weapons also isn't performing like The Sixth Sense either back in the day. And also, because of its lack of diversity, Weapons isn't pulling in a diverse audience, which is hurting its box office and longevity. Whereas all different types of groups, demographics, ended up going eventually to see Sinners and Get Out, which attributed to their longevity, which Weapons isn't enjoying. So that's important to see. It's a big distinction where, what kind of net do you cast and can you widen that net, etc. Now, as I said, Weapons is a huge hit, but it didn't end up being like movie of the year, one of the movies of the year, or even movie of the month. It didn't even play really big all August long. So I would dial down some of the intense speculation and rhetoric that we were seeing with that first weekend. People were saying it was going to be an Oscar frontrunner, make a prequel. Maybe I said screenplay, maybe. A nomination at least, but I don't think I would make a prequel considering how it's performed. Let's see how it does on digital and streaming. Zach Krieger he's not the new Jordan Peele or M. Night Shyamalan. He might be one day, but he isn't quite yet. I would actually, now that we've seen how the film has performed 3 weeks out, I would instead put him in the same group as Osgood Perkins, Parker Finn, and Adam Wingard. He actually fits, I think, perfectly with that group. You have to understand what you have if you're going to use it correctly. So the latter, by the way, leveled up big time with his Godzilla movies. So that makes me feel that Krieger could still have a very big hit with his take on Resident Evil. And so we should definitely still keep an eye on that. As for the rest of the top 10, there are some very nice holds here, which is wonderful to see. Because even though Hollywood has seemingly given up on the rest of the month, moviegoers, or at least a number of moviegoers, have not. And they're circling back to catch a few things before the summer ends. Aw, yay, the movie business is not dead. All right, in fact, The Bad Guys 2, Superman, and Jurassic World Rebirth are all on digital right now, and yet are still pulling in solid numbers theatrically. Universal, talk about a game changer. They've also really changed the business because they're the ones who pioneered this strategy and showed that movies could coexist on digital and still in theaters. Freakier Friday. A lot of you felt I wasn't giving this movie its due in terms of box office last weekend either. And it has reached 70 million domestic. That's very nice. But it's not going to hit the century mark domestic. And it's not going to match the 2003 film's box office either. And sequels are always supposed to do better than the first film. I mean, this isn't horrible, but again, I wouldn't be rushing to make Freakier Friday 3. Freakiest Friday? Although that's kind of a funny title. And I still think Jamie Lee Curtis should make more comedies. Nobody 2, though, fell significantly in its second weekend, which you know what that means. It's a Universal movie, 17-day window, baby. And hopefully I think that stunt-focused 87 North might take a harder look at the quality of the movies that they're pumping out, because I would think this would be a wake-up call, particularly following after Love Hurts, which also did extremely poorly. And of all the small movies, the sprinkling of small movies that hit theaters this weekend, although to be fair, some of them were in very limited release, only Honey Don't managed to make the top 10. That's nice for Margaret Qualley, although these audience scores aren't so nice. But not even, I'm surprised, the English dub of Neza 2 could make it into the top 10. Although it's, they did release the original film in theaters already, so too much time might have passed. Although I'm sure A24 was expecting more. And back to Honey Don't, that's one of the Coen brothers. I mean, it's sad what has happened to them since they've split up. I mean, it's crazy to think the huge dip in quality of their films and that they're no longer in the theatrical landscape. Over on streaming, starting with Nielsen as we usually do, this time for late July, look at how strong Netflix is. Wow! Not just the top 4 on the overall chart, but 2 of those are over 2 billion minutes apiece. That's amazing. Crazy how nobody is talking about Untamed, yet look at how well it's doing. That's like, it must be tapping into the Taylor Sheridan zeitgeist, which no wonder it's so valuable to Netflix and they gave it such a quick season 2 renewal. Same for The Hunting Wives, maybe, right? A lot of you were like, whoa, it's not doing well on Netflix's global charts, but it's a hit in the United States where I think it's only available. And it might also be a Taylor Sheridan-esque hit. But on this overall chart, there's only 2 original shows on it, and that's Untamed and The Hunting Wives. On the originals chart itself, these couldn't make the overall, but the finale of Sandman and the Bosch spin-off Ballad are doing solid numbers, as is Peacock's reality hit Love Island. Remember, they now have 2 reality hits, The Traitors and Love Island. Well, people are indeed still watching Squid Game. Wow. And not too much happening on the movies chart besides Netflix's 2 mega hits. Over on Netflix's own charts, there's K-Pop at number 1 again, while Vanessa Kirby has another moderate hit, and Sophia Carson's latest movie is still doing very, very well. But I can't say the same for Fixed. Gendy Tartakovsky is very respected in the animation space and certainly has his fans in the industry and with audiences. So I'm trying to think what might have gone wrong here, because the audience scores for it are just awful. It's not like it has a small audience, but at least they're appreciating it. I think he might have forgotten why people like dogs so much in the first place, and that they simply don't want to think of their dogs in this way. I think that might be why it didn't connect. Sometimes people, miss the obvious when they're creating something. Like you only see it once you've released it, and then you're like, oh man, that was a mistake. With shows, Wednesday season 2 has slowed down significantly in its first full week on the streamer. But season 1, still towards the top, and part 2 of season 2 drops next week. And that's supposed to have all the goodies that fans have been craving, including Lady Gaga. Season 2 will need a big jolt of energy to, I think, really make it seem like it's as good and as successful as season 1. We'll see what happens. For instance, it's interesting to me that for all the disappointment that people expressed, all 3 seasons of Squid Game top the non-English most watched shows of all time chart. So Wednesday season 1 tops the English language all time shows chart. And Wednesday season 2 is not going to get that high, but going to get close to the first season on the charts. We'll see. It's doing pretty good numbers with only 4 episodes. So that is impressive. And the back 4 are about to drop. So I think that it will make the all-time top 10, but the question is, how high will it get? I still think it was a mistake to split it into the second season into 2 parts. But again, we'll see. And another thing I think that's bothering it is that K-pop is distracting from it. And there's nothing that can be done about that. That's one of the problems, with being all on the same streaming service. K-pop is more valuable to Netflix at the moment because they're going for that Oscar. And they are not trying to sell tickets a la carte. They just want to keep people subscribed or sign up new subscriptions. So I do think that Wednesday is getting dinged a little bit by K-pop demon hunters. What do you think? Then on digital, with Apple's charts, F1 is number 1. But they're cheating a bit here because that's an Apple movie on Apple's charts. And whew! They sure are promoting it on their service. I wonder if other studios could purchase this advertising package. I'd be like, whew, how much for that kind of placement on the site? Superman, by the way, was right to move up its digital release date, as it had a week all to itself before F1 and Mission Impossible hit. And The Bad Guys 2 is doing a lot better than Elia, which also both just hit digital. Another embarrassment for Disney in a year of embarrassments. At least they still have a couple of months to go with some of their best movies, like I think Zootopia and Avatar, and I think the new Predator is going to do very well for them. As for this coming weekend, it's Labor Day here in the United States, where again, I think a movie could have done some real business here, as they have in the past, but Hollywood said, no, we're taking the time off. Instead, we just have Sony's Caught Stealing hitting theaters this weekend, as well as Disney's War of the Roses remake. And Jaws will be back in theaters for its 50th anniversary. I think it was in theaters like a couple of weeks or a month ago, but now it's like officially back in theaters with both IMAX and 3D showings. It's not an IMAX 3D showing, it's IMAX and 3D. Have you never seen Jaws? What? You got to see Jaws right away, in theaters or at home, although it's awfully fun to see an old movie in theaters. It's a very unique and different experience. And you should do it for some movie at some point. I've seen Rear Window so many times, and this summer I got to see it on the big screen for the first time, and I have to tell you, it was a very different experience. Now, Jaws is the movie that created the blockbuster. It came out before Star Wars, and they used it to teach us filmmaking in film school. On digital on Tuesday, Together drops, while on streaming on Thursday, Netflix has the Thursday Murder Club, which not only has an all-star cast, but it's directed by Mr. Chris Columbus. That could be big. I got to say, I was at 40 Carats in Bloomingdale's a few weeks ago, and there was a group there at a table near me who could have been the Thursday Murder Club, and they were right in that demographic. And I have to say, they were excited about this movie. It could get a lot of people tuning in. As for shows, tomorrow there's the final season of Upload dropping on Prime Video. I tried to watch the screeners and realized I'd missed an entire season. I was like, I can't go back and rewatch all that. Disney continues to experiment with turning its Disney princesses into the Avengers, but they don't give us what we want. A legit animated 2D or 3D animated movie or series, right? They keep going around it. We're like, just give us the main thing. Well, on Thursday, Chris Pratt for season 2 of The Terminal List is now joined by Taylor Kitsch and Umbrella Academy's Tom Hopper. That's excellent casting, by the way. Those guys are both a great fit with Chris Pratt, and so we'll see how that does. That could do very well. Friday, season 2 of My Life with the Walter Boys drops on Netflix, and finally, Apple TV is going to get in on the K-pop phenomenon itself, or try to, as they team up K-pop stars and Western music stars to do remixes of their famous songs, famous Western songs with a K-pop twist. And that takes place actually in Korea, hosted by Gangnam Style's Psy. And that actually looks pretty good to me. I might even watch that. That looks like a lot of fun. It reminds me a little bit of Lip Sync Battle, but with the K-pop twist instead. And that's this week's Movie Math. What have you been watching? What do you plan to watch? And do you think Netflix should continue to prioritize subscribers, or do you think they should genuinely start to make some moves into the theatrical space? How would you feel about it from a business perspective? And also, how would you feel about it? Well, three things. A business perspective, from the perspective of being a fan of movies and wanting to see theaters survive. Maybe you don't, but maybe you do. And then also as a Netflix subscriber, how do you feel that you have to wait 3 weeks for you to watch Frankenstein on the service, or you have to pay to see it in theaters? Okay, share those thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.